I don't think so. No, 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 no. I don't think so. No, 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 no. It's never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. I don't think so.
This movie called From Hell basically is based around Jack the Ripper, who was like a known, world famous serial killer back in London, and he was like the original mass murderer back then, and he was known for like his ways of cutting people like a doctor would.
How would he leave the bodies? What would he do to them?
He would take body parts from them, like organs, especially from the female anatomy. He killed mostly prostitutes, and the thing is, like, he was never caught.
Still to this day,
No one knows who
Wait,
he
did
is.
I feel like there was no way of capturing him, bro. Especially back in the day where prostitutes were looked down upon, and they're not gonna go to the cops because their shit is illegal. And on top of that, they didn't have the technology that they have now, like for example DNA or fingerprints or shit.
Yeah. Wait, so is there an actual picture of Jack the Ripper, or
No,
they never?
they don't know who he is, bro.
Last month, a teenager live-streamed a terrorist attack. It was the 12th of August 2024 in a city in Turkey. An 18-year-old male, only referred to as RDK, walked near to the Tepebasi Mosque. He was wearing a skeleton mask covering his face and a helmet. He was also armed with knives as well as an axe. He was wearing a stab-proof vest as he approached the area. He actually had offensive symbols printed onto this vest. He stabbed at least 5 people in the garden of a cafe next to the place of worship. His victims were mostly elderly men who'd been at the mosque to pray. He live-streamed on the app X, which is formerly known as Twitter. He used a camera that he had strapped to his chest in order to do this. Horrified viewers watched as he approached and then attacked civilians. He was eventually thankfully wrestled to the ground and arrested. By some miracle, it's reported that all of the victims have actually survived.
The allegations of Ansel Elgort sexually assaulting a minor are pretty disturbing if they're true. Let's cover them. So if you don't know Ansel, he's an A-list Hollywood actor. He was in a number of movies like the Divergent series, The Fault in Our Stars, and a film that I love, Baby Driver. Now, I remember back when I was in high school, Ansel was a heartthrob and girls really loved him. But that would all change when some disturbing allegations came out in 2020. So on June 19th, 2020, a Twitter user named Gabby came forward with some pretty disturbing allegations about Ansel. Allegedly, according to Gabby, they had connected online, they had met up in person, Ansel had sexually assaulted her, and the entire time he knew that she was a minor, being 17 at the time that they had relations. Now, Gabby wrote a very long and thorough breakdown on exactly what happened. If you want to read it, it's still on Twitter. But it's really disturbing if all of this is true. Ansel was much older than Gabby. Obviously, this whole thing was illegal because she was a minor, and he even wanted to allegedly have relations with her also underage friend. In the wake of all of this, there were other people who came forward and claimed that Ansel had come onto them when they were minors as well. And as proof, the Twitter user named Gabby, who really fired off these first accusations, came forward and posted a screenshot showing Ansel giving her his private Snapchat information. I don't know what to think about all of this. Obviously, Ansel denied that any of this happened in the first place. He posted a pretty thorough response, but yeah, no legal ramifications ever came out of this whole ordeal. But Hollywood really hasn't seen anything from Ansel Elgort since then.
What the Matrix is based off on, I don't know if it was a philosopher telling this story. Basically, it's based off of this story where 3 guys are locked inside a cave. They're chained down like this. There's a light shining behind them, right? The only thing they can see is a wall with the shadows. And every day somebody comes and like little things, they like put shadows, and they think it's the most beautiful thing in the world, but they don't really see what the makes the shadows. They only think that what exists is the shadow.
These guys never turned their head to see that there was...
They can't. They're chained to
Oh.
only see one wall, but they don't think nothing else exists but shadow.
That's because they never seen the sun.
They don't know anything else. Yes,
The mind, man. It's a powerful thing.
And then one of them breaks free. They turn around and they're like what the fuck? So that's what makes the shadows. So what the fuck is there more than what the fuck this wall was?
It's more than meets the eye.
Yes, exactly.
In 2015, 68-year-old Dennis Antoporek left a note for his family saying he was going to the saunas in the community condominiums, which he used a lot to treat his chronic medical conditions. Once in there, he cranked up the heat and sat down to relax. This is where things went wrong. The timer inside the sauna was broken and the heating coil was malfunctioning, causing the temperature to rise extremely quickly to unsafe levels. Because of this temperature, Dennis collapsed and was unable to escape the sauna. After a few hours, his family realized that Dennis still hasn't returned. So his daughter Laura went down to the sauna to check on her father. Upon entering the sauna, she mistook her father for a dark-skinned man, so she exited the sauna. She then found her father's clothes on the counter and realized the dark-skinned man was actually her father. Help was called, but it was too late. Dennis passed away from asphyxiation, and his skin was broiled as if it was jerky. His daughter was even quoted saying his face felt worse than a dried piece of beef jerky.
This doctor in Kansas was recently charged with an incredibly disturbing crime. Meet Brian Albers. Brian is a pediatric neurologist in Kansas City, Missouri. Before his arrest, this is where he worked, at the Overland Park Medical Center. In doing some research for this TikTok, I saw a number of photos of Brian working closely with children. It's pretty disturbing to see him in these circumstances, given what I'm about to tell you. Well, on November 15th, 2023, Brian was charged in federal court on CP or CSAM charges. Allegedly, Brian had been recording children with hidden cameras. The police also discovered text messages that Brian had sent that read, "I'm going to jail. I'm going to lose my license. I do not want to die. I do not want my kids to see me dead." According to the person who actually reported this crime, they were asked by Brian themselves to head to the hospital to retrieve his electronics. Brian then asked the person to destroy these electronics because they contained, quote, bad stuff. Upon searching these devices, the authorities discovered something disturbing. They discovered over 1,006 explicit videos. Brian had been recording videos of his young patients using hidden cameras from December of 2020 all the way up until October of 2023. And yeah, you heard me say that right. He had over 1,000 videos on his devices. I think that makes these news reports that are still online that feature Brian interacting with children all the more disturbing. So Brian was taken into custody on November 16th, and the FBI is now actively asking people to provide any information they have about him. And I don't think the future looks too bright for Brian.
2005, this man would terrorize an entire community in Maine, and he's never been caught. In the sleepy town of Cape Elizabeth, this man, who became known as the Cape Intruder, began breaking into people's homes just to watch them sleep. The Cape Intruder would only break into homes where doors and windows were left unlocked, and he would never take anything or harm anybody, but he would just stand over the victims and watch them sleep. Some people would wake up to him standing over them, but he would always disappear before they could act. He left the entire town terrified and paranoid to go to sleep. It got to the point that there were so many break-ins that the community set up neighborhood watches to try and catch the man doing this. Victims came forward and worked with police to create this composite sketch. But the break-ins eventually stopped and the man was never caught. And to this day, the Cape Intruder is still out there.
Talking about the incident that happened with Tiffany Haddish.
I'm seeing that shit surface and circle around. And I think all of this started because Arias Spears was talking shit about Lizzo and clowning her and making jokes. And obviously somebody on the net done seen some video from back in the day and decided for them to resurface that or bring it back up. Is a video called The Mind of a... Okay. Something that automatically off rip would just make you feel like, why would you do it? And it's two people who are literally, at that time, were on the way up in the industry, but did have names. They thought making a skit using two young siblings, use them in ways that they shouldn't be used in a video. Not to the extent of what you may think, but like sitting in the tub with the kid.
Like a grown-ass person.
Yes. Or looking at him through cut-eye holes in the newspaper while he's playing with his toys. Just weird, bro. I only seen one video that involved Arias Spears, and Tiffany Haddish was in it for like 2 seconds, but she left. He's being left at home with this person who has the mind of, yeah, someone who thinks that it's cool to like younger children, or even them and all that stuff. It gets uploaded on a website called Funny or Die. Bro, Tiffany Haddish said that the kids were being used for a Nickelodeon commercial. That's how she got them.
This girl and her stepdad vanished from their home. The secrets police will uncover will make you physically sick. Sydney Randall was 14 years old from Arkansas. On the evening of the 9th of March 2013, her mum Denise noticed Sydney was missing. She also noticed her husband John was also missing, who was obviously Sydney's stepdad. Now, Denise was incredibly worried, but she was momentarily relieved when John arrived back home shortly after. However, he wasn't with Sydney. Denise told him of her concerns and how worried she was for Sydney's safety, and he told her not to worry, he was off to file a missing persons report at the police station. However, time went on with no news, and John failed to return home. Denise decided there was nothing left for her to do but to make the police report herself, this time for John and Sydney. A huge search began for the pair. That was until days later when John's body was found. He was found at the side of the road by a field with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, police thought this was incredibly suspicious given the circumstances. John was deemed by them to be likely involved in Sydney's disappearance. After initially being completely flabbergasted by this, Denise eventually agreed that that was likely. Search teams were still out in force to try and find the missing teenage girl, but no luck. Weeks and then months rolled by until eventually, May 2013, a body was discovered. Sydney was tragically found deceased in the Black River near the Lawrence and Randolph County lines. A medical examiner confirmed that she died from blunt force trauma. DNA was found underneath her fingernails and was sent to be tested. Eventually it came back as a positive for her stepdad, John. Now, Denise was understandably devastated by this news. She believed that Sydney and John just had a normal stepdad and stepdaughter relationship, but she couldn't have been more wrong. Sydney's dad then came forward with some more horrific news. He stated that he had suspected that John was SAing his daughter. Sydney's friends would also later confirm that she had told them she was scared of him. It's believed that John likely killed his stepdaughter to keep her from telling anyone about the abuse.
This woman survived one of the most brutal and disturbing attacks ever, and this is a massive trigger warning. On December 18th, 1994, Alison Botha was abducted near her home in South Africa. By the end of the night, she had been stabbed, raped, and disemboweled, but somehow she managed to live. After an ordinary night out with her friends, Alison Botha drove back to her apartment in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. But as soon as the 27-year-old parked her car, a man with a knife forced his way inside. The attacker ordered Alison to move on to a different seat, trapping her inside of her own vehicle. He then drove her car to pick up an accomplice, and it was immediately clear that the two men had sinister plans for her. Franz Du Toit and Theuns Kruger told Alison Botha that they were going to have sex with her. They asked if she would fight them, and clearly trapped and terrified for her life, she said no. The two men, who had history of violence against women, both raped her, and they then soon determined to kill her as well. At first they tried to suffocate her, but even though she lost consciousness, she clung on to life. Frustrated, Franz and Kruger took their brutality to the next level. They stabbed Alison at least 30 times in the abdomen, who later recalled that Franz specifically wanted to mutilate her reproductive organs, but somehow the attackers missed those specific parts of her body. When Alison's legs twitched, Franz and Kruger decided the job wasn't quite done yet. They then slit her throat 16 times. Apparently satisfied that they had killed her, Franz and Kruger drove away, saying nobody could survive this. But little did they know, Alison was still breathing, and in the distance she could see headlights streaking through the bushes. When Alison moved towards the headlights, she realized the full extent of her injuries. As she pulled herself up, her head started to fall backwards since she had nearly been decapitated. Meanwhile, she could feel something slimy protruding from her abdomen. It was her intestines. She had to use one hand to keep her organs from spilling out, and the other hand to literally hold her own head on her body. There, she collapsed along the white line. Even in her disoriented state, she knew that this was the only and best position to attract the attention of the motorist. Fortunately, Alison didn't have to wait long. A young veterinarian student named Tion Ellard, who was visiting Port Elizabeth on vacation, saw Alison lying in the middle of the road and stopped. He used his veterinary training to tuck Alison's exposed thyroid back into her body. Then he called emergency services for help. Alison Botha was then rushed to the hospital where doctors were stunned by her horrific wounds. One doctor even said that he'd never seen such severe injuries in his 16 years of practicing medicine. Alison was on the brink of death, but she managed to pull through, and she also remembered everything about her attackers. She was soon able to identify them from police pictures while she was still in the hospital. This led to the speedy arrest of the Ripper Rapists, as they were called in the press. This case is just absolutely crazy, and can you imagine getting almost beheaded and disemboweled and surviving? I give Alison so much respect because most people would have just given up and died. But she managed to survive despite being brutally attacked and injured. This is definitely one of the craziest cases, and thank God Alison survived.
The Cecil Hotel is one of the scariest places that I've ever stepped foot in. So to get into the hotel, we went earlier in August. We had to do some things to get in there, stuff that I'm not going to mention or be too graphic with, but we made our way in. And I should mention here that the security guard at the front told us that he doesn't go upstairs in the hotel unless he's got a group of 2 other people with him. Yeah, the security guard says he only goes up in pairs or threes. And he also was asking us, like, you guys have a knife, right? And we're like, no. So hearing that from the security guard was a little freaky. But one of the residents who gave us an impromptu tour of some of the floors was telling us some really disturbing, shocking things. She said that since she moved in 2 years ago, there have been somewhere between 15 to 30 deaths inside of the Cecil Hotel. She mentioned that some of those deaths were overdoses. Some of those deaths were people ending their own lives. And I was just shocked by how many residents that we spoke with who lived in the hotel, who had paranormal experiences living there. Like this one woman who was speaking with us said that her and her boyfriend heard a little girl singing in the hallway. And when they opened the door, they saw this little girl, looked at her, they both saw her, and then she just vanished into thin air. And another woman told us that she sees this French man standing by the elevator all the time, gazing off. He's got a briefcase and glasses on. She thinks she gets the vibe that this was someone who took their own life. But I'm releasing that documentary on my YouTube channel tonight, The Paranormal File. It's the first time, to my knowledge, people have brought cameras into the Cecil in a while to show what it's like nowadays. And it's funny to me because you go and you look on YouTube and you can see this clip of the Los Angeles government or city council, whoever it is, when they reopened the Cecil as affordable housing. And the halls were pristine. They were talking about how they're going to really crack down on this place and they're going to do their best to provide so much. They're going to, put their best foot forward and help out those individuals that are being placed in the hotel. And when you're in there, it's not like that. There is a major lack of management there. I talked to a police officer for my video who told me about how many phone calls they get a day. 2, he said, a day from the Cecil. There is violence. There were women that were telling me about sexual assaults that happen in there. People telling us about gangs that control floors that will stab you if you hear the wrong thing. It's truly like a place I have never been in my life. And in my video, I compare the Cecil Hotel in my mind to a character in its own horror story, almost like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Because seriously, if you examine all of these incidents, all the strings of people that took their own lives in the Cecil, the people who were murdered in the Cecil, the bizarre deaths, just all the crazy violent stuff that is not death related. I'm talking about attempts to end people's lives that are never, talked about. I'm talking about overdoses, of which there are probably thousands in the building. And yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable in there. It seems like the Cecil itself is this entity, and not a good one. It's really like a vortex of energy, and it was crazy. So if you want to see all that footage that we captured, it's going to be on my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files, this evening. And yeah, just know that everything you've read about the Cecil, everything you've seen about the Cecil, the documentaries you've seen about the Cecil, it may seem negative to you and it may seem a little spooky, but I can confidently tell you, as somebody that travels to places like this all the time, I've just recently on this trip, I've been to 11 different haunted, abandoned conspiracy locations in England. That place is pure evil. And there is something in there that I cannot put my finger on, that I don't know if it's compelling people to do terrible things or it's influencing people's emotions or what it is, but it's really like the hotel is alive. And if you watch the footage, you will see proof of that. Anyways, just felt like I would share that because yeah, it was crazy.
There's nothing more twisted and disturbing than Japanese style/inspired horror films, so I already know that when this comes out next year, it's gonna be terrifying. The movie's called Something Followed Me Home, and it's loosely based on an evil Japanese spirit called the Onryo. The Onryo is a malicious spirit who can inflict harm on the living, and it's described as being one of the most brutal and deranged spirits, basically killing anything it can as a way of revenge for what happened to it when it was alive. The movie follows Nova, an optimistic woman who one night is followed home by an evil entity. The entity digs itself into her skin and environment, so throughout the film you'll always feel its presence lurking nearby. Then Nova begins receiving strange phone calls from her missing sister, and the rest of the film is her trying to survive a night of terror, which by the looks of it is going to be hard, as the entity's MO is violently placing plastic bags over its victims' heads while paralyzing them with fear. Something Followed Me Home is a feature film that's expected to be released early next year. The inspiration for this film is top tier. It'll have elements of Ringu, Pulse, The Grudge, and one of my personal favorites, It Follows. The director is Simeon Gregory, who is a multi-award-winning filmmaker based out of Yakima, Washington, which is my hometown, so this holds a special place in my heart. This is set to begin filming at the end of September, and Simeon could use our help to raise some funds to make this film as creepy as possible, like exactly as he's envisioned in his head. So if you'd like to donate, you can do so by going to his website, which is in my bio, and there you can see some of his goals and what you can get by donating a certain amount. The campaign for this ends on September 15th, so if you can, let's see how much we can raise to help this filmmaker out. He released one of my favorite horror shorts 2 years ago called Death in a Box. It's about a girl who finds a mysterious box, and when she convinces her friend to open it, sinister events unfold. And it's seriously so creepy that I wish it was a full movie. So if you want to watch that and kind of see what his work is like, it's free on Tubi. I can't wait to see how this holds up and how disturbing it's really going to be.
This is said to be one of the worst cartel videos ever, so whatever you do, don't look up the video. Before I begin, I can't stress enough how bad this video is. Whatever you do, never go searching for it. The full version of the video is 6 minutes long, and the video is shot in the nighttime in some sort of desert location. You see the victim, who has been blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back, and he is also wearing a white t-shirt that spells out the cartel he belongs to. The scene seems to be lit up by the car lights, and the victim is surrounded by multiple heavily armed cartel members. They are wearing all black tactical gear and carrying high-grade weapons. One of the cartel members then begins to read a statement, and as he's doing this, the cameraman starts to move closer to the victim. After the statement is finished, the victim is forced to the ground face down in the dirt. Multiple cartel members hold him down by stepping on his back and pulling back his arms. The victim has been completely immobilized so they can carry out this awful act of violence. The victim doesn't make a sound as he awaits what's about to happen to him. After the victim has been restrained and pinned down, a cartel member carrying some kind of large knife slices a vertical cut on the back of the victim's head. He does this as a starting point to flay and scalp the victim as he is still alive. After the cut, blood starts to puddle on the dirt floor, and using the initial cut, the cartel member slices under the victim's scalp and starts to remove it from the skull. As he cuts, he pulls the skin back to ease the blade cutting underneath the scalp. After a few seconds, the back of the victim's head has been completely scalped. However, the cartel member makes sure not to cut the skin off in chunks and instead attempts to complete the scalping and flaying in one clean go. After the skin on the back of the victim's head has been severed, the cartel member then moves to removing the skin and hair from the sides of the victim's head. While doing this, he also cuts off the victim's ears. The back of the victim's skull looks like a red ball with shades of white from the victim's skull also showing. The top of the victim's head is then scalped. The victim is still alive, but somehow has yet to make a sound. Not even one scream. The victim is then turned over on his back, and as this is happening, a cartel member puts his boot on his chest to stop him from moving, and at this point, the victim, who is still conscious, says his first words, and despite the awful and intense pain he must have been going through, he tells the cartel member to simply stop stepping on his chest in a very calm manner. But as he's lying on his back, a cartel member then flays the skin off of his face. He pulls the skin that has already been flayed and starts to cut down from the victim's forehead. And as the blade slices under the skin, you hear a tearing type sound, which is just awful. After about 20 seconds, the cartel member completes the flaying, but he realizes he missed a few pieces of skin on the victim's cheek. He then goes back and cuts the remaining skin off. The victim also has his nose cut off, and what is left of the victim is a horrific sight. His head looks like a red skull, and due to the lack of skin, it makes his teeth and eyes way more prominent. The detached scalp and face is then placed on the victim's chest, and the cartel member then finishes off the victim by cutting deep into his throat, and it appears to finally kill the victim. The cartel member then cuts off his tongue and takes off his shirt. He then plunges the knife deep into the victim's chest and cuts vertically, exposing all of his organs. The victim at this point has lost so much blood that it doesn't even cause bleeding. The cartel member then reaches into the victim's chest and cuts out his heart. The heart is still beating and he then holds it up to the camera. The cartel member then kneels down next to the deceased victim as the camera focuses on the still beating heart. The last 2 minutes of the video is the cartel member still holding the beating heart in complete silence. Nobody talks and all you hear is the wind blowing until the heart stops beating and the video concludes. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. Just when you think you've seen it all, a video like this surfaces. I can't stress enough how bad this video actually is. It's just crazy knowing that this is happening in real time to real people, and it's just awful knowing that stuff like this happens on a daily basis.
This case will make you terrified to go back to school. This is the haunting case of the back-to-school killer. On the 17th of October 2009, students in Fairfax, Virginia were really excited to go and see their favourite band in concert, Metallica. 20-year-old Morgan Harrington was one of them. Morgan and her friends all went to the concert together, but during one of the opening band's performances at around 8 p.m, she left to go to the toilet. When she failed to return, her friends got really worried. They managed to ring Morgan, who told them that she'd accidentally ended up outside of the venue and security wouldn't let her back in. She reassured her friends that she would probably just try and get a lift home, and the concert went on. After the show, it was clear that nobody knew where Morgan was or could get hold of her, so they reported her missing. Police started hunting for her, and then they made a terrifying discovery. Her mobile phone was found in a nearby car park and the battery had been removed. This was obviously a huge red flag. Witnesses reported seeing Morgan that evening by a nearby taxi rank looking quite drunk. The band Metallica even helped out and did a video appeal for help from the public. Another worrying discovery was made in November when people found Morgan's t-shirt in bushes near the campus. The case seemed to grind to a halt until January 2010 when a local farmer tragically found Morgan's body on some of his land. The police at this point were also testing the DNA on Morgan's t-shirt. This showed that the DNA from an unknown person on the t-shirt was a match to somebody who had attacked somebody in Fairfax in 2005. However, police still didn't know who that person was and Morgan's case went cold. That was until another hideous crime. In the early hours of September the 13th, 2014, 18-year-old Hannah Graham was lost in Charlottesville. She was a sophomore at the University of Virginia. She texted her friend to try and get some help after getting lost after attending an off-campus party. Similar to Morgan's case, when Hannah failed to turn up to class, she was reported missing. Luckily, Hannah was captured by quite a lot of CCTV. Horrifyingly though, in one of the pieces of footage, you can clearly see a man start to follow her. He was a very tall man with either braids or dreadlocks. Women around the same area that evening also reported seeing this man acting inappropriately with women. Earlier in the evening, he'd been asked to leave a bar because of this, and then the women noticed that this same man had his arm around the girl that we now know is Hannah. These girls decided to follow the pair as they just had a gut feeling that something was wrong. They actually tried to intervene and tell the man to back off from the drunk student, but he was quite intimidating. He actually ended up taking Hannah to another bar and buying her drinks. Later, other witnesses said that they saw Hannah by an orange car, apparently telling the driver that she was not going to get in the car. That was the last time she was seen alive. Police managed to identify the driver of the car and the man obviously who was following the student as 32-year-old Jesse Matthew Jr. Infuriatingly, over an 11-month period, he had actually been investigated for allegations of art at multiple universities. He was never prosecuted and he was actually able to just simply leave those universities after each incident. Now, interestingly, Jesse actually drove a taxi. If you remember back to Morgan's case, she had disappeared while at a taxi rank. After being interviewed by police, Jesse frustratingly managed to get away. He sped out of the police station and escaped. He was plastered all over the news and luckily a woman at a beach in Texas spotted him. She ended up calling police to report this, but they really didn't take her seriously at first and she ended up having to call several times. After she literally had to beg them to show up, Jesse was eventually arrested. Police were able to link him to the attack in Fairfax in 2005 and also to Morgan's murder. A month later, Hannah's body was found just 5 miles from where Morgan was found. He was eventually sentenced to 3 life terms for the attack in 2005 and then given 4 life terms for the murders of Hannah and Morgan. In 2019, interestingly, he was actually diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and I can't seem to find an update as to whether he's still alive. Please take this case as a warning to be extra vigilant and always stay with your friends on nights out. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have to do this, but obviously women are vulnerable, so please do keep a lookout for anyone looking vulnerable and walking on their own.
Whomever coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
My 2-year-old son accidentally shot me with a gun while I was pregnant. My name is Laura Ilg, and I was 31 years old and married. I was doing laundry when my 2-year-old son went into my husband's and my bedroom. Normally, this room was always locked, but not this time. That's when he managed to find my husband's gun, which we had for extreme emergencies, but we never thought it would be used, let alone in this way. As I was picking up the laundry, I had my back turned to my son, when suddenly he accidentally shot me in the back while I was 8 months pregnant. I managed to call for help, and I was transported to the hospital. Unfortunately, I passed away a few minutes later due to my son's actions and my own carelessness. The baby I had been carrying for 8 months also did not survive, as the doctors couldn't save it. Unfortunately, my husband's gun took my life while he was absent. So, after hearing my story, are you in favor of or against guns in the United States? I'm looking forward to your opinion in the comments.
Teenage cheerleader has been found murdered in her bath. Lisbeth Medina was a 16-year-old girl living in Texas. She studied at Edna High School, and her mum had actually recently moved to the area from Nebraska just the year prior. She was recently absent from a Christmas parade she was due to attend on the 5th of December. She'd actually planned to attend with her whole cheer squad, so it was very unusual that she didn't show up. Her mum decided to go and see where she was, and what she found was every parent's worst nightmare. Shockingly, she found her daughter in her pajamas, deceased in the bath. Due to her being found in her pajamas, authorities think this may mean she was killed before school on the day in question. Police believe that she is a victim of capital murder and have arrested a 23-year-old man. This is 23-year-old Rafael Romero. They have not yet released the girl's cause of death. Her auntie has launched a fundraising page for her family, and she states, "Any support that you can offer to my family at this time, anything is appreciated."
These are pictures with the most disturbing backstories, part 4. Okay, here we have this picture. And the man shown here is just a chef cooking some food. But a little while later, he tosses his head into the fryer, completely deep frying his entire head with oil and dying. And the most messed up part about this is that there's a video of it. Apparently the man was possessed by some sort of ghost or demon, or he had some sort of mental illness, which was even noticed by some of his co-workers. But in the video, the man rotates his head extremely weirdly and inhumane, and just throws his head into the deep fryer with no hesitation, leading people to believe that he was possessed. Because why else would any sane person just throw their head into deep frying oil? I don't recommend anybody watching or searching up the video because it is pretty disturbing. Mainly because it just comes out of nowhere. 1 minute the chef is just cooking food doing his job, and the next he starts twisting his head all weirdly and throws his head into the deep frying oil. I will probably never watch it again, and you should never.
I caught a brain-eating amoeba while swimming in an abandoned pool. My name is Caleb Zilgelbauer, and I was a 14-year-old in 2022 when my family decided to make the most of the summer by exploring local fairs and looking for a seaside house to enjoy our vacation. We found a house with a pool that wasn't in great condition, but the heat made us overlook this detail. We planned to explore nearby beaches and continue enjoying local attractions. However, we had no idea of the nightmare that awaited us. 5 days into our trip, I was plagued by fever, searing headaches, and even hallucinations. The next fragment of memory I managed to retrieve is waking up in a hospital, confused and terrified. Doctors quickly identified the cause of my torment. A brain-eating amoeba, a creature literally feasting on my mind while I innocently enjoyed my vacation. To make the situation even darker, this infection has a staggering mortality rate of 99%. My family was devastated, and I had only a 1% chance of survival. Doctors gave me no more than 4 days to live, but I survived.
So this happened on Sunday. A man has been charged with aggravated assault and other charges after police alleged that he intentionally crashed his car into a Pennsylvania home. This resulted in the vehicle being lodged in the home's roof and the second story. At around 3:15 p.m. on the 6th of August, an incident occurred in Mifflin County, Pennsylvania. A 20-year-old called Evan Miller allegedly drove his vehicle into this home on purpose. Police stated in a news release that they believed that this was an intentional act. Joan Lepley, whose house was the one in question, says that she was with her cousins when they all heard a commotion. Joan heard her relatives shout to her, "There's a man on your roof and there's a car on your roof." The vehicle is thought to have collided with the embankment outside of the house, causing the car to propel upwards into the roof. Thankfully, because of where the car hit on the roof of the house, nobody was injured. If it had hit the ground floor of the house, it could have been a very different outcome. The driver has been charged with multiple charges, including aggravated assault, recklessly endangering another person, and obviously careless driving. After a man disappeared under mysterious circumstances, a random person browsing on Google Earth accidentally solved the mystery. William Maltz was 40 years old when he vanished. He disappeared from Lantana in Florida on the 8th of November 1997. Now, he wasn't particularly drunk when he left to go home, and he called his girlfriend at 9:30 p.m. to say he was nearly home. The police launched a missing persons investigation when he failed to return home that night. However, there were very few leads and the case soon went cold. It would be an agonizing 22 years before there was any news of what happened to him. It wasn't until the 28th of August 2019 that a member of the public was browsing on Google Earth and noticed something strange. It was the manager of the Grand Isles housing development near Palm Beach who was looking at the area via the satellite images on the website. They noticed something in a pond that looked like a submerged car. Police were notified and sent officers to investigate. The car was removed from the water and had clearly been under there for an extended period of time. It had completely rusted, and inside, as you may have guessed, were human remains. The medical examiner confirmed that the remains were William. The area had been a building site at the time of William's disappearance. It was concluded that he must have lost control of his car on his ride home and accidentally gone into the pond. His family were now finally able to have some closure and lay him to rest. This horrific murder will put you off ever buying off Facebook Marketplace again. Denise Williams was a 54-year-old mother of two from Pennsylvania. She worked as a nurse and lived in Hornerstown. It was April 2021 and she needed to buy a fridge for her boyfriend. As many people frequently do, she looked on Facebook Marketplace to try and get one secondhand. She had no idea it would cost her her life. She found the fridge that she wanted and contacted the seller, who was Joshua Gorgon, who was 26. After travelling to his house to pick up the fridge, she never made it back. Now, her family's quick thinking at this point undoubtedly played a massive part in the investigation. They reported her missing to police and provided them with the details of the Facebook seller post. Police were able to hunt down the seller's address and turn up. There they found a hideous crime scene. Several knives were found, and it transpired that Denise had been stabbed to death. Her car was discovered in a car park of a Richland Township shopping centre 4 blocks away. Fresh blood was found on the driver's side door. Tragically, Denise's brother Bobby Williams Jr. had actually been shot and killed in 2013 in an unrelated incident. Her family now had to grieve another homicide. It's believed that Denise and Joshua had had a disagreement about the price of the fridge. Things had clearly escalated horrendously. Joshua had stabbed the nurse multiple times before moving her car and phone from the scene in an attempt to throw police off the scent. Investigators stated it was clear that Denise had put up a massive fight to try and defend herself. He was given life plus 24 years in prison.
This famous Hollywood actress allegedly groomed a 7-year-old and assaulted him when he was 17. This is Asia Argento. She has been in a lot of movies, including a lot of horror movies like George Romero's Land of the Dead. Her father is infamous Italian horror film director Dario Argento. And Asia Argento was dating Anthony Bourdain before his death. So when the Me Too movement was happening back in the 2018-2017 time, Asia came forward and accused Harvey Weinstein of assaulting her. She became one of the faces of the Me Too movement, which was a movement dedicated to listening to victims and believing them. Asia also claimed that another film director had drugged and assaulted her on the set of a film. But in 2004, Asia met young actor Jimmy Bennett on the set of a film. At the time, Jimmy pictured here was only 7 years old. As Jimmy grew older, he and Asia allegedly kept in contact. And in the year 2013, when Jimmy was only 2 months past his 17th birthday, Asia allegedly invited him to her hotel room, plied him with alcohol, and then assaulted him in a number of ways. So right after Asia came out and talked about her experiences with Harvey Weinstein, that's when Jimmy decided it was time for him to talk too. And quietly, behind closed doors, it was arranged that Jimmy would be paid almost $400,000 to keep quiet. Jimmy would even claim later on that he was inspired by the Me Too movement himself to speak about his own assault. Now, initially, Asia denied all these allegations to news outlets and said that his story was completely false. But then, after these denials were made public, evidence came out. A photograph was published of Asia wearing absolutely nothing while in bed with Jimmy. And there were also text messages made public where she admitted to assaulting the minor and said that it felt weird and that she didn't know he was a minor. Now, Rose McGowan actually came out and said, "We don't know the full details of the situation, show restraint and be gentle to Asia." And people absolutely roasted her because what she was saying was directly in contradiction to the entire purpose of the Me Too movement, which was to believe survivors of assault. Eventually, Asia's attorney admitted that there was an encounter between her and Jimmy, and she was fired from her position as a judge on the X Factor. Now, there are a lot of conspiracies dealing with Asia Argento and her late boyfriend, Anthony Bourdain. If you guys want me to talk about those, let me know in the comments section below. Breaking news, a shootout between this guy and the FBI 2 years ago has just led to a massive arrest of over 100 members of a global pedophile network. This is a tragic and sad story, but I'm thankful that these people are being arrested and brought to justice. So this is David Lee Huber. He was born and raised in Louisiana, but he eventually moved to southern Florida where he lived for most of his life. And on February 2nd, 2021, the FBI showed up to his front door because they were serving a warrant for his involvement in a CP case. And apparently the things that this guy was doing involving the CP were graphic and disturbing, so they sent out a huge force to take him in. So when agents first showed up at his door to serve this warrant, he saw them on his Ring doorbell camera, grabbed a rifle, and immediately began firing at them. A lot of the officers returned fire, but unfortunately 2 officers were struck and killed immediately. These were officers Daniel Alfin and Laura Schwarzenberger. Laura was killed instantly, but Daniel was hit and managed to return fire before he was killed. So after an absolutely massive police presence showed up and began returning fire, Daniel Lee Huber then barricaded himself inside of his home, returned fire a few times, but eventually took his own life. This obviously led to a massive response from the authorities, and when they looked into the computers and devices that he had in his possession, they were shocked. So apparently Daniel Lee Huber had been tied into an international pedophile ring. This ring operated on the dark web, they had highly encrypted file sharing devices, and this network spanned the globe. And when they found out that this guy was connected to all these other people, an international investigation was launched. Part of this investigation was focused in Australia, where a bulk of the people committing these crimes were located. I mean, all this was made public just yesterday, but the Australian suspects that were just arrested are between 32 and 81 years old. They're highly intelligent, as was stated on the release. They know how to manipulate computers and internet networks. And a lot of these members of this ring were producing and sharing their own CSAM or CP, which means that these men were some of the worst of the worst. But this led to an international investigation, like I said, and people were arrested here in America as well, a number of pedophiles that were attached to this network. So I definitely would consider this a win. Obviously, we don't know yet who was connected to this, what's going to come out of this, or exactly what these people were doing, but I think this is a step towards justice. And sadly, these 2 agents who heroically sacrificed their lives trying to protect children ended up saving so many more. But yeah, just here in America, 43 people connected to this investigation have already been arrested for producing CP, possessing CP, all of that. And I'm hoping they will arrest hundreds more.
John Jarvis hated smoking with a passion, and it was his hatred for his wife's habit that led to him killing his whole family. It should have been a clean break for this family when they moved into and started running the Winslow Hotel in Blackpool, but their joy at this opportunity was short-lived. It was early on in 2003 when John found a packet of cigarettes in his wife Trisha's coat pocket. He'd asked her to kick the habit multiple times, and she'd even signed a prenup agreement when they got married to say that she'd limit herself to 6 cigarettes a day, but to John, even one was too many. John had told Trish that if she didn't stop smoking, he'd divorce her, and he'd even gone as far as telling a friend that he'd kill her. He hated the smell of smoke in the house and on his and the children's clothes, and when Trish lit up a cigarette and smoked it right in front of him, he decided something had to be done. In March 2003, John and Trish went out to the pub one night and there was a psychic giving readings. What she said to John was the final push that he needed to murder his wife. She said, "Do what you failed to do 5 years ago and sort it out." That night, while he lay next to his sleeping wife, he reached into his bedside drawer and took out a hunting knife. He rolled over and began stabbing Trish over and over. She woke up screaming, but eventually she fell still and silent. But that wasn't enough for John. Shockingly, he decided that she could be resuscitated if she was taken to hospital, and she'd be then free to carry on with her smoking habit. So he did the one thing that he knew would stop that happening. He cut out her heart. John then saw someone standing in the doorway watching him. It was his youngest son, 7-year-old Stuart. He was shaking and crying. John walked over to him and stabbed him to death. He then walked to his other son's bedroom, 11-year-old John. He calmly said, "You're going to join your mother," and he stabbed him to death too. It later came out that in John's mind, these were mercy killings. He had stopped his sons from growing up knowing that their father killed their mother. He then wiped the blood from his hands and face and went and sat down at his computer. He started to write out a message, and it read, "Smoking by my wife to all it may concern. She never stopped, and if I only divorced her, I would always be reminded of the fact that she lied to me. So you will all see and learn I have given her and the boys absolute freedom. Forgive me for taking this drastic measure." He then typed in the names of Trish's 2 brothers and pressed send. The next morning, John and Trish's teenage daughter went to wake her brother for school, and she found him dead in a pool of blood. She found her parents' bedroom door locked, so she called for help, and the police eventually arrived. The police kicked in the basement bedroom door and found Trish dead and John laying next to her with a knife wound to his chest. He was still alive after attempting to take his own life. There was a Bible on John's nightstand that lay open at the book of Revelation, and the passage related to the coming of the beast. It was propped open with Trish's cigarette lighter. Leading up to the trial, it actually came to light that John had an undiagnosed mental health condition after being involved in an accident as a teenager, and he pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge accepted this plea and he was detained at Ashworth Hospital in Liverpool, where he remains indefinitely.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is by far the worst cartel video ever released, and whatever you do, don't go looking for it. Before I begin, I can't stress enough how bad this video is. Whatever you do, never go searching for it. The full version of the video is 6 minutes long, and the video is shot in the nighttime in some sort of desert location. You see the victim, who has been blindfolded with his hands tied behind his back, and he is also wearing a white t-shirt that spells out the cartel he belongs to. The scene seems to be lit up by the car lights, and the victim is surrounded by multiple heavily armed cartel members. They are wearing all black tactical gear and carrying high-grade weapons. One of the cartel members then begins to read a statement, and as he's doing this, the cameraman starts to move closer to the victim. After the statement is finished, the victim is forced to the ground face down in the dirt. Multiple cartel members hold him down by stepping on his back and pulling back his arms. The victim has been completely immobilized so they can carry out this awful act of violence. The victim doesn't make a sound as he awaits what's about to happen to him. After the victim has been restrained and pinned down, a cartel member carrying some kind of large knife slices a vertical cut on the back of the victim's head. He does this as a starting point to flay and scalp the victim as he is still alive. After the cut, blood starts to puddle on the dirt floor, and using the initial cut, the cartel member slices under the victim's scalp and starts to remove it from the skull. As he cuts, he pulls the skin back to ease the blade cutting underneath the scalp. After a few seconds, the back of the victim's head has been completely scalped. However, the cartel member makes sure not to cut the skin off in chunks and instead attempts to complete the scalping and flaying in one clean go. After the skin on the back of the victim's head has been severed, the cartel member then moves to removing the skin and hair from the sides of the victim's head. While doing this, he also cuts off the victim's ears. The back of the victim's skull looks like a red ball with shades of white from the victim's skull also showing. The top of the victim's head is then scalped. The victim is still alive, but somehow has yet to make a sound. Not even one scream. The victim is then turned over on his back, and as this is happening, a cartel member puts his boot on his chest to stop him from moving, and at this point, the victim, who is still conscious, says his first words, and despite the awful and intense pain he must have been going through, he tells the cartel member to simply stop stepping on his chest in a very calm manner. But as he's lying on his back, a cartel member then flays the skin off of his face. He pulls the skin that has already been flayed and starts to cut down from the victim's forehead. And as the blade slices under the skin, you hear a tearing type sound, which is just awful. After about 20 seconds, the cartel member completes the flaying, but he realizes he missed a few pieces of skin on the victim's cheek. He then goes back and cuts the remaining skin off. The victim also has his nose cut off, and what is left of the victim is a horrific sight. His head looks like a red skull, and due to the lack of skin, it makes his teeth and eyes way more prominent. The detached scalp and face is then placed on the victim's chest, and the cartel member then finishes off the victim by cutting deep into his throat, and it appears to finally kill the victim. The cartel member then cuts off his tongue and takes off his shirt. He then plunges the knife deep into the victim's chest and cuts vertically, exposing all of his organs. The victim at this point has lost so much blood that it doesn't even cause bleeding. The cartel member then reaches into the victim's chest and cuts out his heart. The heart is still beating, and he then holds it up to the camera. The cartel member then kneels down next to the deceased victim as the camera focuses on the still beating heart. The last 2 minutes of the video is the cartel member still holding the beating heart in complete silence. Nobody talks, and all you hear is the wind blowing until the heart stops beating and the video concludes. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. Just when you think you've seen it all, a video like this surfaces. I can't stress enough how bad this video actually is. It's just crazy knowing that this is happening in real time to real people, and it's just awful knowing that stuff like this happens on a daily basis.
I don't think so. No, 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 no. I don't think so. No, 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 no. It's never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. I don't think so. No, 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 no. I don't think so. No, 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 no. It's never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. I don't think so. No, 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 no. Maybe someday you'll have it your way. Maybe someday it'll all work out. Maybe someday you'll have it your way. Maybe someday it'll all work out. Until then, nope, a nope, a nope, a nope, definitely nope, a nope, nope, a nope. Probably never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. Oh no.
This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I mean, I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. This story is far from over. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, did not act alone. This TikTok series is about to blow your mind, but there's a lot of information here, so proceed with caution. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer clown, is one of the most infamous true crime stories in American history. A brief overview of the case: in the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men. He buried them in the crawl space beneath his home and his yard, and he was connected to a number of different crimes. Gacy himself gained infamy because he dressed up as Pogo the Clown on the weekends and volunteered at hospitals and children's birthday parties. Now, the official story says that John Wayne Gacy acted completely alone. He had no help in carrying out any of these murders, but I really don't believe that that's the case. Through all of our research that we did for our podcast, we've determined that Gacy was connected to a number of other killers, pedophiles across America. And he even may have been connected to one of America's other most infamous serial killers, the Candyman out of Houston, Texas. So before we get into this, I want to state that I do believe that Gacy did murder some people, and I think he was very complicit in all of this, obviously, but I don't think that he acted alone. But why do I think that? So to start off, we need to talk about Jeffrey Rignall, this guy who was actually a survivor of John Wayne Gacy. After a night of abuse and essay at the hands of John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Rignall was allowed to go free. But what Jeffrey would go on to tell authorities and the media about what happened that night at Gacy's home is a major thing in this whole conspiracy. Now, Jeffrey would tell the police that while Gacy was essaying him, there was another man in the room. Now, whether or not this other man participated in the essaying or they were there to watch, it doesn't matter. Someone was watching this criminal act occur. He knew he could give a description of the guy, and he knew that someone else was there watching this happen. Then we get to Robert Bob Gilroy, who was a victim of John Wayne Gacy. So Robert Gilroy was abducted on September 15th, 1977. That's the official date that he went missing. He was supposed to show up for an event after that day, but he never showed. But John Wayne Gacy's plane tickets and records placed him as being out of the state at the time. His plane tickets from the time show that Gacy left Illinois on September 12th, and he didn't return until September 16th, the day after Robert Gilroy went missing. Already, these two facts point to a larger conspiracy at hand. There may have been people helping procure victims for Gacy, and he may have been even paying for these victims. And that's when we get to Philip Paskey and John David Norman, two of the most horrific people I've ever read about, and this is where the connections with the case start to get really shocking. And we've talked about John David Norman here on my TikTok before. This guy was connected with the higher-ups in the government. This guy had lots of political power, and he was a known pedophile. Remember, in earlier TikToks, I even told you about how John David Norman was arrested multiple times. He had Rolodexes full of index cards of the people who he was supplying these young men to. And both times, the police departments lost the Rolodexes and lost all the names of the abusers. But how did they connect to Gacy? Well, in part 2, we're going to talk about it. This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it. So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted. They were told to remove all of their clothing and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. and they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This is where it gets juicy.